The interview will start shortly, where you will see Dr. Luigi Lerose and myself. However, the start of the interview was not recorded, so there's a part missing which I want to fill you in on. I introduced Dr. Luigi Lerose, who is born in Italy, who lives in Scotland and works in the UK, and who flew over to Dublin for this interview. Now, why Dublin? Dr. Luigi Lerose has been involved in the Centre of Deaf Studies for 4 years. And he was involved as an external examiner. So to review our marking and assessment of students, to let us know if he would be in agreement or not, but also to support and give us advice on our teaching practices and curriculum content. So he did that for 4 years. Now, those 4 years coincided with COVID. So it was impossible for Dr. Lerose to come physically to Dublin. At the same time, Dr. Lerose and myself would meet each other here and there in Europe at conferences around sign language research, interpreting studies. And in September of 2024, there was the EFSLI conference in Italy, and we were both members of the scientific committee. And that was a very pleasant collaboration. Now, in September, Dr. Lerose mentioned to me that in January 2025, so recently, his new book would be published. Now, that sounded to me like the perfect opportunity to invite him to Dublin to talk about his background, his journey in personal life, academic life, teaching, and of course, his new book. So that is what the interview will be about. So at the start of the interview, I asked Dr. Lerose how he got involved in sign language research, linguistics, and teaching. He replied by saying that it's very important for him to make clear that he was born in a deaf family. So he had deaf parents, siblings, and also other deaf family members. And that made that signed language was their primary mode of communication, not spoken or written languages. And that would have been Italian sign language, LIS. So sign language at home, but also in deaf education, which kind of made for a strong linguistic foundation. And that supported his interest and his development in an interest of going to university, pursuing a BA and MA in history with a focus on deaf history. Now, during that program, he would read more and increase his knowledge and also develop an interest in linguistics. So this was still in Italy. And there was the University of Trieste, where his linguistic interest would even grow further. The sign language variation in Trieste showed a lot of overlap with the sign language used in Austria. And that has to do with historical reasons of war, colonialism, but also education, where people would go to Austria to learn how to teach deaf children and then bring parts of that sign language back to Trieste. So there's a lot of similarity between the two sign languages. And a lot of students were interested in doing that cross-linguistic research at Trieste University. Now, at the time that Dr. Lerose was teaching there and supporting students, he was not a doctor yet. He did not have his PhD yet. So he will expand more on how he did his PhD, where he did it. And it is important to mention also one person here, one person's name, who really supported Luigi's academic journey, and that is Professor Franz Dotter. And this is his sign name. So that's just a summary of what was happening at the start of the interview. And now, over to Dr. Lerose.
Finished. I was at a university in a town called Trieste. And Trieste is signed like this. And so it's northeast Italy, very northeastern. And I was in the university and I had a 1-year contract to teach the language. And as I was teaching, it was going very well. I was thoroughly enjoying myself. And I started to wonder whether teaching could be my pathway. I had linguistic knowledge because of the module that I'd done, and I was starting to use this and apply the linguistic theories that I had, the reading I'd done, to my teaching practices. Over to you, Isabelle.
Yes, okay. So your time in Trieste, but Trieste is not where you did your PhD, is it? You then did another move to another country, unsurprisingly.
Yes, that's right. So Trieste really is where I started teaching, and I had students. And some of those students wanted to focus on the dissertations. And those dissertations, with regards to the sign language in Trieste, there are various influences, and we started to realize with research that actually different countries, particularly Austria, had influence on the language and Trieste and its language variation. And the realization is that Trieste was using the sign language of Austria, and it's because of different boundaries that had been drawn over the years in terms of how people had emigrated, and also in the past where wars had been won and areas had been taken of territory. And so this is where the merging of those two languages really started to happen. And I think it was 97% Trieste sign language was predominantly influenced by Austrian Sign Language. And so I was at the University of Klagenfurt, and I was interested with regards to the University of Trieste and Klagenfurt having a partnership. There was interest there. And so there was research starting to take place and exchanges of information and knowledge. And so as these exchanges started to take place, there was a professor named Franz Dotter. And this is his sign name here. And so we had conversations, Dotter, sorry. And so we started to have these conversations. And Franz thought I'd completed my PhD and was surprised that some of these linguistic notions that I understood should be understood by someone that hadn't completed a PhD yet at all. So he welcomed me on a program. And at the time, in terms of deaf students doing a PhD program in Italy, there were none.
When you say about the time, precisely what time are you talking about?
So it started in 2006, where I began to consider the prospect. And then I started to write a proposal. And obviously proposals take time, so I was building that. And then this became validated and approved, and that by that time it was 2007. So as I focused moving forward on the research that I was doing, I was starting to look more on phonology and deixis. There was also adverbs that I was interested in too. So there were 3 pillars really that I wanted to focus on. And so that's what I built together within this proposal. And then in 2012, my PhD was completed.
Well done, gosh. So the topic of your PhD was cross-linguistics, or was it focusing on, what was it focusing on specifically?
No, it focused on LIS, which is Italian Sign Language.
LIS, I see. Okay. So the 3 areas you were looking at was phonology, deixis, and adverbs.
That's right, yeah. And so when we think about phonology as a section, this was where it was published. This section was published in a book, and it was just specific to phonology relating to LIS. And it was looking at the students that had learned the language and the resources they'd been given and used throughout their studies.
So that's the completion of your PhD. So we're at 2012. So
thank you.
So you completed that, and a young Luigi, a young, ambitious Luigi, what did you aspire to do next?
I think back then, what I wanted was to work within a university. That was my ambition. I'd been taught in HE, in academia, and I'd seen the various pathways that you could go down, the conversations, how engaging they were, the research, all the various different facets of information you could start to look at. It was like opening a door and a sea of information coming at you. And so this is where I really wanted to work. So my contracts that I'd had, they were annual contracts, and they were at different towns and places as I was working. And these contracts were had been going on for some time, but it'd been 4 or 5 years that I wanted rather than just 1 year. So I completed my PhD in Italy, and at that time, LIS hadn't been recognised. So this was frustrating for me. So at that time, in 2012, I decided I needed to look at different countries. I needed to look at a different place. I love Europe. I love going to different places within Europe. I've been involved in many different European projects, collaborating with various peers, and also being part of the deaf community. The European deaf community is massively important to me and really satisfies a need that I have in supporting that community. And so I've been in Austria as well. And so I thought maybe it's time for another country to try and see what happens there. And so this is where I started to look at UCLan in the UK. There was an advertisement for a role there, and I started to envisage my life in the UK, but I thought I need to give this a go. It hadn't been something I'd considered in the past. So I thought maybe I'll spend a year there. It will stretch me, I will grow. I will think about how my teaching styles and teaching methods, but I had never used BSL and learned BSL. My English potentially might need to improve. So there were lots of points that I thought, this is definitely going to make me grow, but I need to apply and see if I can make it. And so I applied, I got in, and then I was there for a year as a temporary position, and it just seemed to click. 1 year was up, and then all of a sudden, I was another 3 or 4 months into that second year, and I was offered a permanent contract. And so that's just been my working life for 11 years now. It feels as though it's been 4 or 5 years, but it's gone so quickly.
So before, you were saying that you were considering your PhD in 2006. You did all of that. You then applied for it in 2007, submitted in 2012. You said there were not a lot of deaf people around at that time in an academic landscape who were doing PhDs. So what was your experience? How did you find the journey? What were the barriers? What were the issues that you had when you're trying to research LIS, when you're breaking through in an area that hadn't been done before by others?
Perfect, good question. So my PhD, it was difficult because in terms of opportunities, I think communication is key, engagement is key, interpreters and being able to get interpreters, trying to think about how you connect with interpreters, and then wondering if they have the same viewpoint that you do when you put across a point. That's a real concern. That's very much a concern of mine. It's very difficult in terms of interpreter payment. Who pays for the interpreter was another contentious issue. And so these things just continue to pile up. Also, networks, having contacts and networks was key. And so for my PhD, that's what started to happen. At the time, I didn't have any. There were just 2 deaf people, and there was nobody else out there. Whereas, and so that's what's so odd. There's no other people doing PhDs that are deaf in Italy. I would go to conferences and there'd be deaf people that would meet there, but it would be such a small portion of the conference. You'd make that connection and then they disappear, because in 2007, social media was in its infancy. It was so young, so connections were hard to make. Facebook hadn't really kicked off until 2009, 2010. And so networking was incredibly difficult. You had to know other deaf people, and often you knew them through research. And if you wanted to share research, it was very, very difficult. And so making strides forward was hard. It was by all means not easy. So working, and then also in terms of teaching, and then also researching, having that opportunity there was massive, and so that's why I had to go for it.
Also, the languages as well, isn't it? There was LIS, you were in Austria.
Written German and Austrian as well.
Then you built up with British Sign Language as well. So you built up a lot of language experience. How many languages are you proficient in now?
So first, in terms of language proficiency, I am, since a child, I've loved language. I've loved acquiring languages, and that's just been a journey that I've been on. However, in terms of everyday use, in terms of the languages that I use every day, there's 4. There's BSL, there's Italian sign, LIS, which is what I use with my family every day. There is written English, and so reading articles, emails, things like that. And then written Italian, so the news, potentially on my phone when I'm communicating with family. Occasionally, I'll use international sign, but it's much less frequent than those other daily languages that I use. But I was the chair for ENSLT, and so that was where I used international sign most predominantly. ASL is another sign that I can understand. My production of it probably isn't at the same level as my receptive knowledge, and so, but I'm able to get by. Austrian sign language, I can get by with that, and so it's signed like this. And so over time, I haven't used this, which means it dwindles. Whereas when you start to use the language, it builds back up and it comes back quite quickly. But I have basic knowledges in those languages. So I think we're on 7. And there's probably others as well. There's lots of other sign languages that I've been exposed to, and they're all wonderful. So.
Also, before you were saying of your love of Europe and networking and the importance of that. And even more so for deaf academics to establish those networks, to be able to resolve the barriers that exist. So you know the importance of the European network. And you were saying about ENSLT, the European network of sign language teachers that you were involved in. And that also allows you to be involved with lots of European countries too.
Yeah, so in Europe, really, it was a European project. There were lots of different European projects, but this was a specific project that I was part of. But it looked at how teachers could improve, also employment, language and international language acquisition. Teaching students was something that I've been part of since 2013, and this was not something that had been set up. And so there was a conference at that time, and really there was a need for this to be established, this organisation, Europe-wide, to be established. Looking at ENSLT, looking at other professionals having these European bodies, there was a clear gap in the sector. And really the concept that's important is accessibility. That's what's key. That's where the driver is. It's about accessibility for deaf people. And really, we say thank you to interpreters for having that, for giving us that access. However, in terms of how they learn and develop that language, who teaches them that language? And there's no organisation for that. And that's the organisation that should be feeding the interpreting organisation. So there was a group of us that made the decision that there was a real problem, there was a real issue, and there needed to be an official organisation that was recognised by governments Europe-wide. And so we wanted to establish this organisation, but we realised we'd need a bank account and how we would open a bank account for a European charity. How do you do that? What do you do that? And so we had to go right back to the start and literally start from nothing and build up all these processes, all these functions, speaking to governments at European levels, going to Belgium and Brussels. So we were in there, we were understanding policies. And so then we we realized we'd spoken to the king, and so that was the wrong department that we needed to speak to, so we needed to go back and do something else. And so then we went back, we opened the right bank accounts, and we started to make the right movements forward. And the reason why I'm explaining this is because it wasn't a quick process. It was full of trial and error, and we had to do many different things to get there. And then we started being able to do workshops and activities and really start to try to build this European network. And the languages are also different, and the levels and diversity of teaching practices are different. And so it's about information sharing. It's about that transfer of knowledge to ensure that equity is there. And so I was the president. I was there for 6 years, and I've handed that over to somebody else now.
Do you still have some involvement or no involvement at all?
Yeah, I'm an advisor here and there, but I try to allow that president to have the impact that they need. I try to let them have their independence. Obviously, if there's ever anything needed, I always have one eye open and one eye on the situation, but I feel like it's in safe hands, and I'm very happy for that to be the case.
Related to your teaching, before you were talking about your research and about your journey and about your learning experience and how you grew as an academic. When you talk about teaching, who is it you're teaching? What is your target audience?
So in terms of my teaching practice, the levels of people that I teach go from beginners, so we could say level 1, right to interpreter level, so where they're at the point that the highest level of language teaching. And so there's always more that people can do. There's always more linguistic theoretical application that can occur. So that is something that I look at. In terms of different courses and how people learn and what they want to learn, deaf culture definitely plays a part in that. And that's something I also teach. But mostly what I do is teach the language.
So you're teaching in a university standard, so hearing students who are there. And do you also teach deaf?
Yes, so I've taught cohorts that have deaf and hearing students, but really I just focus on the language. It doesn't matter the demographic that's in front of me. It's just important that their language develops. And what's important within these environments for the deaf people that are there is that their identity can grow and thrive, and they can build that identity. They realize that there are deaf organizations, and there are some deaf people that have been in my classes that don't know these things. And so it's a real positive when I'm able to do that and show them the things that deaf people have achieved. In terms of my time in Italy, when I was teaching linguistics, there was specific linguistic frameworks. However, there was a pack that 3 of us used. So there was Pino, Serena, and myself. And we named it SPL. So S for Serena, P for Pino, and L for Luigi. And so this was our linguistic pack. This was our course. And this was focusing on LIS. And it was offered to anybody deaf or hearing that wants to become a teacher of that language. And as we were creating this, we realized that initially the course was 12 hours, and then we upped it to 30 hours, and then it was 60 hours, and it eventually reached 100 hours. This would take place on weekends, and it was a real wonderful course. You could see deaf individuals that wanted to become teachers of this language. You could see them really evolve in terms of their approach to language teaching, and you could see how their experience really helped them. Now, this experience massively benefited my teaching in Britain for British Sign Language. However, in terms of linguistics, there's also social linguistics. And so there are other modules that that build the full course for the British Sign Language studies that take place in UCLan. So that it's not a complete linguistic package like SPL was.
We know academics have different functions when they're working, they're teaching, they're drafting, they're publishing, they're writing articles. There's so much, but do you have a specific area that you like the most?
So there are two. There's research and teaching. And obviously we have to look at these two factors together. Now, teaching, we think about there's a third area. The third area is impact on the community. Quite often we do research, and that research disappears into the ether to academic communities, but neglects the deaf communities that it's supposed to serve. And so quite often I feel like it's important that we remember that academic theory is there to serve the deaf community. Working with interpreters, you see that when they finish the course, they're happy. They say, okay, we've got the language, and we also have we have the two languages. So we have BSL and English, and also the processing ability. So the ability to process between those two languages and build those constructs. Now, the courses, workshops, the CPD, this continues throughout an interpreter's career. Now, if we think about an interpreter, they use English every day, they listen to the radio, the TV, they're speaking to their family. When does an interpreter use British Sign Language? This is somewhere that's completely neglected. And languages are constantly evolving. There's constant diversity being added to languages. And so it's so important to keep up to date with that. And this is what I really want to push and highlight. It's not a criticism, but I really do want people to think about where they're developing their skill set. Are they developing their skill set in English and neglecting their BSL skills? And so it's about having a balance between the two and realizing that these two languages for interpreters is absolutely connected.
For sign language, you know, people, they're learning the sign language, but they've got to be able to see it being used in its lived experience within the community, because learning in a classroom is an environment which is very much the same environment where they're learning, but it's very different for how that language is used in the home, in the street, in the community, and how the communities accept people by the way they use the language. So it looks not like just learned in the classroom, but the way it's lived experience.
For me, it's important that the deaf community having that connection, and the connection is with that language. That's where the deaf community is served. And so it's about understanding that it all relates to one another, and that it's a holistic approach that has balance, and it's so important to be balanced. We think about teaching hours being increased. We think about research being diminished. We think about those projects that take place. Really, could we do with more research? Could we do with less teaching? It's a balance. They can change. And so we need to focus on keeping these things equal. When I moved to the UK, there was a lot of teaching and there wasn't much research at all. The teaching really ate into my research time. I'm quite lucky now that my research has increased and I'm doing much more research than teaching.
Also, research and teaching inform each other in many aspects. Sometimes when you're teaching, you can come across an issue, and actually it's through research that you can resolve how to apply it to teaching, and vice versa. Sometimes the teaching will inform you with your research.
I completely agree. They go hand in hand. You get something from the research and you find something so valuable that you can use within your teaching practice. And you know that those students might go on and research that themselves. So it's so beneficial. Occasionally when you're teaching, you find areas of issue, and then that inspires your research. You then speak to other people within research and they pass on information to you.
Yes, the research informs the teaching and also then goes to the community. And likewise, it goes in the reverse direction. The community influence the teaching and influence the research, because where the issues are in the community, it then generates the research and it feeds into a loop.
Over time, with specific regards to linguistic research, there's been publications, there's been articles and books, many books published. But in terms of teaching practice, specifically for BSL, it seems as though there's a gulf, there's a real divide between those two paths. And they live in tandem and they don't seem to connect with one another. They're not connected. And I think that gulf really needs to be bridged, because there's so much theoretical research that's going on into linguistics, and it's their language, it's the deaf community's language. It surprises me that so much happens, but there's so little impact into that deaf community and to the teaching. Yeah. And this isn't just the case with the UK, this is the case Europe-wide. This is what I see, and I don't know why this is happening. I feel fortunate myself that I'm part of both the linguistic community and the teaching community. And so I'm able to take both of those facets and put that into my work. But it's a real concern of mine that the linguistic practice or the researching practice isn't benefiting the teaching.
When you think about who are the teachers who are teaching sign language and the attributes that make a good teacher, what would you say are the important attributes and skills? If you were to name 3 or 5 attributes you think make the complete good sign language teacher, what are the skills that you think someone would need to have?
In terms of skills, when you're teaching, when you're working with people, it requires lots of different skills. But the first thing I would say is what resources are available, and offer people access to those resources. That's one of the most important things, because if access isn't there, then there's issues, then there becomes problems. If you're not giving people the access that they need, then how can they find the material themselves? How are they able to develop those concepts independently? And that's where the issues really start to come in. So I would say reflection, self-reflection, understanding where you are able to communicate best with people, how you engage with people, how you engage with groups of people, understanding the language you use, the language and the ability of the language that you have, and thinking about how you can transfer that to other people and offer that to other people. Thinking about linguistic theory and new linguistic theories, and understanding the gap between the research and teaching practice. We can start to bring those together. They will really benefit one another. They will be symbiotic. And it's how we manage those skills. And in terms of technical advancements, technology has a huge impact now on how we use our time. We can do things so much more quickly with technology. And so it's important to bear that in mind too. We think about courses that are available, there's plenty. But now when we look around and we think, let's look for a British Sign Language tutors course, it's very difficult to find one. You can see people struggling to become tutors. It's a real concern. Really, and again, this isn't just the case in the UK, this is Europe-wide. And for me, what's important is that when we're looking at this situation, we need to think about resources. We need to think about access to resources. And then we can start to evaluate the situation. If we try to do this evaluation first, it's not fair. We need to make sure people have access to the information.
Have you got an example of, you talk about making sure people have access to resources. What type of resources could you give us as an example?
Yeah, so if we talk about English teaching, and we think about a book, for example, we might need something to reference. look at all the various books that have been published on English. There might be methodologies. And so there's plenty there. The options are plentiful. If we think about activities, the various activities in teaching, we could be creative. And you might think, well, this is a weakness of mine. But you can find an activity in a book. You can find something online. There's so many different activities and organizations and groups that are able to help. And so this is massive in terms of the resources that are available to allow people to thrive. When you're teaching, this is important. The resources are important. And so when you're teaching sign language, you might want to use YouTube. You might want to, and so myself, I've spent time looking at YouTube videos and saying to my colleagues, is this appropriate? Does this work? Is this good enough? And so we have some policies, some things are allowed within the university, some things aren't allowed, some things need to be downloaded. So it can be quite a lengthy process. And also speaking to other colleagues that are sign language tutors, they're few and far between. So it's very nice when you do get an opportunity to have a conversation with them. Now, for myself, technology, I love new ideas, innovative new ideas, thinking about CPD and continuing to develop, having guest lecturers in, bringing people in, bringing new ideas in. And what you realize is it's very difficult to find someone. And when you do, the age can be inappropriate, that they can be a bit too old for the audience and the demographic that you have for the students in terms of the topics that they're going to talk about. So it's a very difficult process, finding the right people to bring in, to bring the right ideas and the new ideas into the course. The university has workloads that they prescribe to people. And so everyone has fixed amount of hours that is appropriate for them to do. And so this is also an issue because looking for materials takes such a substantial amount of time out of your day. It's difficult. Can you explain to your manager who might be hearing, by the way, I've been looking for resources and it's taken me all day and I haven't been able to find the appropriate ones. Do we really think they would understand? And so this is what I think we need to be doing. We need to be thinking about the resources to get them out there, to ensure that access is there and available for people that want to do this.
I think related to teaching deaf studies, the teacher, and the language, we think that once the teacher is qualified, that's not the end of the journey. The qualification is the beginning of the journey. And it's the same for all of us. When we teach, every day, a new dilemma, a new experience will occur. And it's just not simply that we've completed a course and we've got the full toolkit. We're forever building on our toolkit and building how we do things. And with sign language and linguistics, and looking at sign language linguistics is catching up over time on where linguistics have gone before, starting in the US and Europe, and looking at new research and new publications coming out of South America, from Brazil. There are new publications coming out from many areas about sign language teaching. And what it teaches us is that it never stops. You continually grow. You continue to learn, as tiring as it might be to find that information, because it can be very difficult to find. But you've got to make sure that that inspiration continues, the fire within you to motivate you to continue to learn and continue to grow.
We have to continue to consider and think and innovate and create new things. And as a group, as a team, it happens much more quickly. You're able to do this with much more synergy and speed. Whereas when you're on your own, it takes time. And this is really about the book. This is why I've created the book.
Yes, when we talk about resources and what's accessible and teaching, I think we move on to the book. So I believe this is a new book. This is next 1 week, is it? 2 months. It's 2 months old. So it's a very, very young baby book in the sense of age of the book. But can you give us the description of what inspired you to write the book?
So essentially, I was thinking about students and the questions students ask. And so I have had over the years multiple questions with regards to various issues with teaching British Sign Language. And there are three main principles. We think of theory, errors in signing, and the practical side, the practical use, the continual use of the sign language. Now, the theory is what feeds, and this is what I've been talking about. We have new theoretical principles, new articles being published that should be being offered to the students. And this is an additional resource that they can have. However, this content, quite often it talks about the methodologies of researching, scientific practices. And the students are only interested in the practice of the language because they're trying to potentially become professionals that use the language. And so they're not looking to be future researchers. They want to be professionals that use the language. And so when they see an article like this, it's considerably overwhelming for them to really start to break down, understand, and take in this article. And so for them to find those nuggets of information that is going to benefit their language use, it's very difficult. And so when I go through it, I realize, oh, this is useful and this is useful. And so obviously for someone going down a research pathway, that's fine. But for someone not, it's understandable that they would find it difficult. So I've tried to really break down the information and build it up in something that's very efficient for them to use and to understand where the benefits of the theory can apply. And then thinking about the use, that when they're using sign language, how they use it. But what I notice is that people make the same errors. I see the same phonological mistakes that occur. And so when I'm trying to relate theory to these errors, you can see that they know the issue, they know that they've made a mistake, but it's important that they know they made a mistake, should I say, because it's about identifying an error. If they don't have the linguistic theory and knowledge, they can't identify when they make the errors. I will give you an example. So thank you from the chin. In a shop, you might buy something and you sign thank you to someone and they sign thank you back. But sometimes they sign thank you from the lips. And it's often, obviously, we can add a bit of humour to this and we can have a little bit of a laugh. And we can say, oh, are you trying to blow kisses to me? And as soon as you make them realise, it's a bit of an impact. And there's embarrassment there. And obviously, they probably won't make that mistake again. However, when you go back into that shop, it's successful, even though they've been a bit embarrassed. And so the thought of doing that to my students, obviously I can't work like that because it's such a sensitive way to teach. It's quite insensitive, should I say. And so when we think about practical resources, videos, and identifying errors, that's key. And so essentially being able to copy the errors and identify the errors to show where the mistakes are being made is so essential for their own awareness, for their own ability to identify where they've made the mistake. And then the feedback, identifying the mistakes and highlighting the issues and how they can improve, that's great. But in terms of their practical use of the language after they've left university or their studies, that's the issue. And that's part of the reason why this book is out there, because it's about practical activities that can be added for people to look at and to use as a resource to continue to develop and improve. So they understand the theory, they identify the errors, the common errors that are made, and what they can practically do to make those errors much less likely to occur. Now, this is all not necessarily under one topic because it's a broad topic and you can't cover absolutely everything. However, these are just the most common mistakes that I see, and I've been able to group them and break them down. Signing accuracy. So ensuring that signs are accurately produced. So, for example, the location, are you doing it from the chin or are you doing it from the lips? Where are you drinking from? Are you drinking from your lips? And making sure that there's the correct location that's occurring. Secondly, we think about space. So where things are in space, is the glass on top of the table? Is it below the table? When we're signing, how we demonstrate space and what are the rules? So in the UK, Ireland is over here. Whereas you see people doing it the flip side, almost the mirror image, because they're trying to make sure the person watching them is understanding it, and they're changing it. So they're making almost a mirror image. And what they should be doing is showing that topological space within their own mind. That is how they get the point across. That is the appropriate rule. Third, thinking about role shift, which is the old name for this. It's changed now. So constructed action. Classifiers can also be considered as part of that, but they are much more of a depiction. And so we're demonstrating what's happening. And so this goes into much more detail as to what these things are and how they can be used and how you can use them together. So using the space with classifiers and ensuring that the appropriate hand shape is correct, and how these things work in tandem with one another to ensure that they're coherent throughout. And so this book took me about 4 years to produce. It took me quite some time. The theory, the practical elements was great, but the big issue was the technological issue. This was a real tricky one because adding the pictures and changing the pictures impacted the format. And so you would have something numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. You would add some pictures and the formatting would change. There's also video examples. I took multiple video examples, and you can take pictures of the QR code, and that sends you to an appropriate link. So there's stills in the book, and you use the QR code, and that means that you're able to then go and access the video online. And that video demonstrates clearly all the appropriate movements that are within that sign.
So 4 years of work. Did you enjoy the process, or did you find it rather frustrating at times?
Yeah, I wanted more than anything for it to be published. I was so eager for it to be published and complete. It's like, it felt almost like having a baby, but 4 years of pregnancy. It took quite some time to birth this document. So, but yeah, here it is.
So when you came up with the idea of the book, did you look to see where you were going to publish the book and you went to CUP? What was the process of, because you had the idea of the book, you knew what you wanted to do, but how did you bring it to realization for publication?
So first, I just started to think about the content, not necessarily the book. The book was the end product. And so the previous book, BSL, I think it was a British Sign Language, an introduction to British Sign Language, which was by Ben C. Wall and Rachel Sutton Spence. This was an introduction to British Sign Language linguistics, and I think it's over 25 years old. So this was written by linguists focusing on linguistic research to demonstrate what the language was. And part of that was showing what BSL was. It wasn't necessarily for BSL teaching. And so what I wanted to do was to build something that focused on the learning, focused on the teaching. And so that's the difference between this book. And that was my proposal to Cambridge University Press, to see if they wanted to publish something like that. And so we had conversations back and forth. We had lots of meetings and considerations whether everyone was satisfied and happy with the idea. It was a very engaging process, and yeah, it worked very well, and it was a smooth process throughout.
Who is the target audience of the book? Is it's for researchers or for teachers or for people who are learning sign language? Where do you see it?
Really, the book aims for anybody that wants to use the language, specifically BSL, but it's continuing practice. It's continuing to improve your own skill. And potentially you're making mistakes and you don't know that you're making mistakes. And it's about making people more aware, building that awareness, building that understanding of your own language production to identify where you're making errors and the concerns that you may have, because this feeds the deaf community. This is in connection with the deaf community, and it's for the deaf community. Lack of awareness really impacts that community, and so it's so important that they work together. And really, it's something to support and continually improve the language use of students, the interpreters, and making sure that they continue to progress and develop. And so that's what it's for.
So the book primarily is aimed with British Sign Language in mind, but say someone who was in Ireland and wanted to apply the same to ISL, or in Belgium, where we have two sign languages that are used. We've got the VGT, and we've also got the LASFB. So perhaps with the theory and with the practice, is there a way that could be applied to different sign languages too? Or is it only particular to BSL?
So there's a thought of me doing something with regards to something in Italy. However, in terms of the content, absolutely, it can be applied to different sign languages. Obviously, it's written in English. And also, there's signed examples. Now, you can see potentially some of those could be adjusted for LIS, for example, for different sign languages, potentially Irish Sign Language. It's just, and it would still be written in English. It would just be making sure that those hand shapes matched appropriately. And I'd have to obviously make sure the checks were thorough and that those hand shapes were all correct. Belgium Sign Language, obviously there's 4 different languages there, isn't there, which is quite tricky that you're working through.
Yes, the 2 written sign languages.
So it's a real headache, isn't it? A political headache. Yeah, so I don't think this is something I'm thinking about now. If someone comes with a proposition, maybe, but you know.
Well, if any of you would like to make contact with Luigi, perhaps maybe the last question regarding the book. What is the takeaway that you want someone to take away after reading the book? What would be the most important aspect?
And so, as I said before, what's important is that it's the deaf community. This centers on the deaf community, their language, the development of the language, and the appropriate teaching of the language. If you want to work as an interpreter, it's so important to be in contact and be part of that community. And it's not helping, it's being an ally, being part of that community as a member. And if you want to work as an interpreter, that's the key. It's being associated, being part of. And also, as I say before, Chapter 1 highlights and recommends events, deaf events, things like that you must go to, because that's where you use the language skills necessary to develop.
Well, I would like to say thank you to the Cambridge University Press. If you want to order the book, there is a special discount, and we have some flyers here, which I can give out to you for those who are in the room. And for those on Zoom, there is an email that can be sent as a link. So for those who are interested in ordering the book, there is a special discount price. So I would also like to thank Cambridge University Press, because we are also going to give out some lucky people who will be able to win the book. I've got 5 books. The first person will be on Zoom. And then I'm thinking 2 of the people who are in the audience this evening in the room, and then 1 for me, and then a final book for CDS to have in our library. Yes? So I've got a special app, and it's a wheel spinner app, and it will randomly choose a name. So first of all those who are registered on Zoom, we'll start off with you. We had 118 people registered to enter the wheel spinner. Okay, I'm going to show you the winner to the camera. Okay, it's spinning. It's coming to a close. And the winner is Sarah May Bell. Sarah May Bell Harrison. So we had so many people who joined from all 4 corners of the world, from China, from the UK, from Ireland, of course. So Sarah May, you have won the book, and we will send you an email, and we will make sure we can arrange to have that sent to your home address.
Sarah May replies, thank you, in the chat.
Sarah May has responded in the chat, and she says, thank you. Well done, Sarah May. Well done. Now, for those who registered in person this evening, yes, I've added your name too. Bridget said that she forgot to register her name, but we have put her name down. Brian, sorry. Brian. I've added your name down. So we've got everyone's name. We'll do another spin. Ooh. Well done, Brian. Thank you. Thank you. Come up. Come up, Brian. Well done. There you go. And you can have Luigi to sign your book too.
I'll do that later.
Look forward to that later, Luigi.
Fabulous. Okay, we're going to have one more spin for somebody who is in the room. And the winner is Karen Wrongley. Karen. That's absolutely fine. So 4 years as a student here at Deaf Studies, but not here at the moment. That's okay. I can make sure that we give it to her. She is registered, so I will pass it on. Great. Okay. So there's one more. Oh, no.
Ah,
Jodie, well done. Well done, Jodie. Come on, come on.
I feel embarrassed.
Well done, that's brilliant. Well done, enjoy the reading. Another student of ours? Okay. So Luigi, perhaps I'm going to finish with one final question and I'm going to hand over to the floor and also for those online too. What does the future hold? What's the next journey in the path of Luigi?
so in terms of the future and how I envisage that future, it's still the same principle. CPD, continuing professional development, making sure interpreters and tutors are able to develop their BSL skills within workshops and other events. So just ensuring that this work that I've done is disseminated, is promoted, and has that impact that I want to have on the deaf community. Secondly, obviously a bit more time, so a bit more time for myself, going places, taking pictures, running, seeing my family, sport.
That's perfect. Well, I think we all will follow your journey closely, both your academic journey and your running too. That's great.
Wonderful.